Over the past few months, we've got many teasers for the next update for Space Engineers 1. As we covered in a previous video, we know that this is going to be a survival update and one of the main features is going to be food. But we've recently received a look at the new environmental hazard system, including radiation, acid rain, and a bunch of other things. So let's take a look. This teaser came out a while ago, so you've probably seen it by now, so we won't spend too long on it. As you can see, we have a new planter block, and inside the planter block you can see we have some crops. Now it cycles between 4 different crops. We start with what appears to be some cabbages, then some berries, then some wheat, and finally, mushroom. We're rich! Now it's important to note that these 4 crops are the same 4 crops that are in Medieval Engineers, so it remains to be seen whether they've just imported the Medieval Engineers assets and are just going to use them, if these are placeholder assets and they can use something different in the future, or who knows. Since this teaser, we haven't actually seen another example of crops in the game, so currently we don't have any idea. However, we do know how we'll be converting these crops into food. The next teaser for this update was a new block called the food processor, which you can see here. As with a lot of the blocks that have been recently added to Space Engineers, the design of this is really good. We've been spoiled by the recent additions to Space Engineers, and this is another exceptional example. As it's called a food processor, we know that this is our machine that is going to craft food, and I hope as it crafts food, this little arm in the middle moves around and just does stuff. As I've always said, I love little interactive elements on blocks, especially spinning things, as you all know, so I just hope it does something. This teaser was released in the monthly Space Engineers newsletter, and it comes with a short blurb to go with it. With the optional food settings coming in the 1.207 survival update, we'll be adding a number of blocks to the game to support that system. Last month we gave you an early look at farming. This month it's all about food prep and ration crafting. The food processor is a small factory which allows you to prepare and combine various food items you've grown or gathered and craft a whole variety of ration packs. Now, who ordered the seared sabroid? Seared sabroid? Hello my friends. I'll be able to loot sabroids for meat? Ooh, that's very interesting. Unless they're adding any more mobs to the game, presumably the only way we can get meat is from sabroids and the wolves. So potentially meat might be a rare resource in the Space Engineers universe. And also, I'm not sure I really fancy eating bug meat, if I'm honest. I do have a little theory about why this sabroid meat might be important though, but we'll come to that later. And speaking of things coming later, I have a really big video in the works that you guys have been asking for a while. But with all the work that's going into it, I was thinking we could make it a sub goal thing. So when I hit 75,000 subscribers, I will release it, which should be a fairly straightforward goal to reach. Up above, it says about food prep and ration crafting, where below it specifically says about crafting a variety of ration packs. So it's unclear at the moment whether or not all the food that we'll be able to craft will be ration packs, or if there'll be something more complex you can create. But again, I do have a theory about how this all works based on something we'll look at later, so I'll leave my speculation for now. The fact that rations are crafted by a separate block, the food processor, I think ties into the fact that you're going to be able to turn food on and off, and because it's on a separate block, it's kind of isolated from the rest of the crafting system, which may be a good or bad thing based on how interested you are having food as part of the game. I do think it makes sense to have it as a separate block. The assembler crafting all your mechanical components and then also crafting all your food does seem a bit odd. But I digress, it is a video game, so those kinds of things don't really matter. But it's also worth mentioning that they say this is one of a number of blocks that be added to the game to support the system. One of them we've seen is the planter block, and obviously we have this food processor, but what else are they adding? Presumably we need some automatic way of harvesting crops, so potentially there's some sort of automatic harvesting block. Maybe there's some sort of sprinkler system with the lack of water we have in Space Engineers 1. That might be a bit far-fetched, but I'm not sure what else they could add to support the food system. Maybe Sunlamps so you can grow food in the darkness of space? I don't know. Last week on Marek Rose's weekly dev diary for Space Engineers 2, he briefly spoke about this Space Engineers 1 update and teased the new environmental hazards, which you can see here. This teaser shows caustic rain on the alien planet, which apparently deals damage over time to characters. Note that it says specifically characters, so I'm presuming it only harms the engineer and not your ships and blocks. Unless of course that is a configurable thing like food is, so potentially in the world settings you can change it so that acid rain damages blocks. We'll have to see. Aside from this, there's not really anything relevant in the screenshot. This over here is one of the ships that appeared in the teaser for, what was it? Decorative Pack 3? This is the Decorative Pack 3 vertibird, I think. And this on the right is one of the new unknown signals that was added in the last update. This isn't the only time we've been shown the environmental hazards though. This week, a lengthy teaser was released showing off several new environmental hazards, specifically weather-based ones. The first one we see appears to be fog, and it doesn't appear to affect the character in any way other than limiting his vision. And then a second one appears to be rainy fog, and it's worth noting that this fog looks way better than it currently does in Space Engineers 1. This here is fog in Space Engineers 1, and you can see it's, just a bit grey in the distance, and that's about it. It's a little bit darker, yeah, but it's nothing compared to the fog we see in this recent teaser. And this here is rain, and it's just night and day compared to this teaser. It looks so much better on this new teaser. It cannot be understated. But there's more than just cosmetic improvements to these environmental hazards. If we come to the next one, the Sandstorm, you can see a message appears at the bottom of the screen to say you've been struck by debris. So this new and improved Sandstorm environmental hazard now damages players that stand in it. We'll talk more about this later in the video, but in the blurb released alongside this teaser, it explicitly says that the Sandstorm only damages the player and not grids. So it'll be interesting to see if all the weather-based hazards are the same, or if some of them are more lethal than others. This planet having 1.2 Gs of gravity means that this planet is Pertam, which is quite far away from where you normally start, and it also has aspects to it like the Sabroids and the low thin atmosphere that make it very hostile to live on. So having a unique hazard like dust or sandstorms that damages ships might be a cool way to increase the difficulty on the planet. But I am biased as Pertam is by far my favourite planet in Space Engineers 1, and maybe in Space Engineers 2, but we'll talk about that in a future video. There's also another interesting thing to note from this teaser. Here you can see I'm on Pertam in the current game of Space Engineers, and in the bottom right it says warm, whereas in this teaser, in the bottom right, it says Inferno. Now the temperature thing is one of those weird things in Space Engineers that exists but wasn't really fleshed out. I know weather was a mod before it was added into the game, and I can't remember if the temperature system was part of that mod or if it was his own thing added at the same time, but it would seem that in this update they're going to expand the temperature system to include hot temperatures as well. So the way it works in current Space Engineers at the moment is you can see it says warm and it's green, and that's good. But if I were to teleport myself into space, you can see at the bottom now it says freeze, and basically when it's red, it adds a passive energy drain to your suit as your suit shields you from the cold, and when your suit runs out of energy, you start to take damage. So potentially there's an expansion to this in the new update, whereas on top of cold temperatures, warm temperatures also drain the energy from your suit, and then when it runs out, you start to take heat damage instead. And this nicely ties into my theory I mentioned earlier, but there's one more thing we need to cover first. Also, I'll quickly mention before we move on to the next environmental hazard, the Sandstorm looks so much better than they do in current Space Engineers. It actually looks like a sandstorm rather than an orange haze in front of my face. Here we get to look at our caustic rain in game, and you can see as our engineer runs along, they get corrosive elements have compromised your suit integrity, so much like when you take damage when the debris hit you, in the acid rain you slowly take damage as you stand in it. Again, I don't think that's going to damage blocks, but we'll have to see how that part works. And this environmental hazard and the final one we're about to look at are both on the alien planet, so potentially acid rain and the next environmental hazard are both exclusive to that planet. Makes sense to me. So let's take a look at that final environmental hazard. There is a green glow in the background. There are little particles hovering in the air. And if I didn't have to edit the music out of this video, you'd hear the Geiger counter clicking in the background as the exposure level appears on the left-hand side, slowly ticking up. This is radiation in Space Engineers 1. I'm assuming this is some sort of radiation storm that pops up on the alien planet and potentially might be exclusive to there, although based on personal theories I have about Pertam, it could also potentially appear on Pertam as well. But regardless, radiation in Space Engineers is pretty cool. Unlike the other environmental hazards, this one doesn't appear to damage you immediately. With the exposure level on the left hand side, I'm presuming it ticks up over time, and then when it reaches 100%, potentially then you start to take damage, or maybe it just instant kills you, who knows. The radiation is definitely the most cinematic looking of these new weather effects though. I'm sure someone has already mentioned it in the comments already before getting to this part of the video, but on the bottom left of the HUD, there is a food bar now, which is very interesting and also, for me, very concerning. Is that bar going to disappear if you toggle food off, or is it just going to always be at 100%? I don't know guys, not sure how I feel about that one. But whilst we're looking at elements on the UI, that brings us nicely to my food theory. In the middle of the toolbar, you can see two of our ration packs. The icon for both ration packs is exactly the same, but next to the actual item icon, there is an icon to indicate what type of ration it is, I presume. The one on the left is a leaf or a nut or something like that. Maybe it's grain. And the one on the right is either one of two things. Maybe it's like seaweed or something like that. It kind of looks like wavy leaves going up. Or maybe, I think it might be fire. Look, I know what you're thinking. Zero, you can't eat fire. First of all, skill issue. And second of all, I think that the different types of ration packs do more than just give you sustenance. Whilst there is a bar on the UI to indicate hunger level, presumably, we were told previously that we were able to configure the level of our survival experience. So what I think is these rations serve a double purpose. So as we see our different environmental hazards, so we see the fog and the rain where it's cold, and you see the sandstorm where there's an inferno temperature in the background, and then we see our radiation, which slowly builds up over time. I think that even if you have food off, we can potentially use food items to potentially mitigate some of the effects of these environmental hazards. If potentially this meal here is like a quote-unquote fire meal, maybe that makes you more resistant to the high temperatures on Pertam. And potentially one of the rations, not one we see here, but if I had to guess, I would say it's seared Zabroid, gives you a resistance to radiation, because I can't really think of any other way you would do this. There's no equipable suits in Space Engineers, and based on the way the skin system currently works, I don't think they're ever going to implement that into Space Engineers 1. Maybe 2, but we're not there yet. And otherwise, the only way to get around these hazards is to just get in a ship, and it seems pretty pointless to add environmental hazards if there's no way to overcome them other than getting in your ship or base. So I think this food system is linked somehow to mitigating some of these hazards. Now, I don't think you're going to be eating a rock meal that makes you resistant to sandstorm debris. That is pretty far-fetched. But resistance to hot and cold, and resistance to radiation, those are real things you can do in real life. Kind of, sort of. But this is also a video game, so it doesn't have to be 100% realistic. But hey, that's just a theory. A game. There's a bit of text that goes with this teaser which I think is pertinent. The upcoming 1.207 update for Space Engineers brings many new gameplay elements to survival mode. One of our core goals is to change how players view their character. We want the players to feel invested in their character's well-being and continued survival. Alongside other new systems which support this goal, we're introducing environmental hazards that directly threaten that renewed sense of care, putting your engineer in serious danger. One of the first hazards you'll likely encounter on your journey comes in the form of overhauled weather events. These have been adjusted both visually and functionally. Sandstorms are no longer a temporary visual backdrop. They're a dynamic and dangerous situation that must be planned for, endured, and overcome. Grids may become safe havens as these storms batter and choke the region. Surviving the storm is just the beginning. More dangers lurk just over the horizon. So, there's two things I want to mention with this. The first one is that it clearly indicates that weather hazards are just a subset of new environmental hazards. So it's very clear that there are more environmental hazards than just these new weather ones. Maybe radiation is more of a passive hazard, which doesn't just appear during radiation storms. Maybe there'll be radiation in space, so you can't stay out in space for too long, further incentivizing you to eat that radiation reducing food. Or potentially, radiation will play a more active role in random encounters. Now, in the past few updates of Space Engineers, we've got brand new planetary encounters, we've got an overhaul to cargo ships and unknown signals, and we've got endgame encounters, but random encounters have not been overhauled at all. So, if they continue the trend of the last few updates, it would make sense to do random encounters in this update as well. One of the random encounters I vividly remember is there's a haunted ship, and you go in there and the lights start flickering, and then things start randomly spinning around and stuff. It was pretty cool when they're added, but by modern standards they're pretty basic. But if they overhauled all the random encounters, potentially they could add an abandoned ship which is leaking radiation everywhere. And there's cool loot in the ship to find, like processed components and maybe unique food resources, but you have to find a way to deal with the radiation in order to get it. As mentioned earlier, I'm pretty confident that there is more to food that meets the eye. I don't think it's just a direct hunger bar thing, especially with the little different icons next to them. That has to mean something, right? Otherwise, if ration packs is the only thing we can create, they might as well just make it one item, because it's always going to fill up the same amount of hunger. There's got to be something that separates these different ration packs from each other. Until we see something regarding random encounters, don't take that as gospel, because we don't know at the moment. We know it's a survival update, so presume most of the elements of this update will refer to survival. It just makes sense from what we've seen so far that the next update would also include random encounters. But we know there's a PvP update coming after that, so maybe they'll put it there instead. Do you think my theory on food is correct? And considering the survival update is going to focus on food and environmental hazards, what else do you think they could add in this update? Let me know with a comment below, and as always, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more Space Engineers videos like this one. And also, if you want to go the extra mile and support this channel, you can do so by becoming a Patreon or YouTube member with the links in the description below.